On the morning of the 9th of November last year, as it became increasingly clear that Donald Trump was about to become the 45th President of the United States, the media and the political establishment desperately began searching for an explanation. Now, it wasn't just an explanation of how he'd come to win, it was also how no one had really seen it coming. And one of the main explanations they focused on was the rise of fake news. People had seen it happening before the election, and afterwards they suddenly thought, was this the thing that swung it? Was this the thing that we didn't see? Now, I think actually a lot of this may be overblown. In a presidential election, the margins are small, but we have very little evidence to suggest that it actually changed that many votes. However, the actual discussion and debate about fake news has opened up a problem that people have been ignoring for years. And this is a fundamental change in the power dynamics of our information ecosystem. Now, to look at this change, it's really useful to go back and examine how the modern media had an era of dominance before the internet. And the major technological innovation that allowed that was the Gutenberg press. Now, this was the first time that you could produce information for a huge number of people from one central location. It's changed over time with radio, with TV, in scale and scope and style. But the fundamental principle remained intact. It was the control of a printing press, the access to a TV station, having access to a radio tower that enabled you to reach huge numbers of people and tell them what was going on and about the state of the world. And these ways of broadcasting information were controlled by a small number of people, often from similar backgrounds, with shared views of the world, and often associating with each other. And those people were, of course, journalists. People like him, although I'm a journalist, that's what we look like a bit more now. Now, if you ask most journalists why people believe them throughout most of the modern era, and why people should still believe them, they'll normally talk about ethics and skills. They'll talk about things like double sourcing, rigorous fact-checking, maybe a degree of neutrality and balance. And those things are all great. They've kept most journalists in check, and they've also helped sometimes hold power to account, inform the public, and really importantly, create consensus. Consensus around which people can actually make decisions, around which we can run our democracy, about which we can use to ensure society doesn't get worse and hopefully improve it. But no matter how good all those things are, they're not actually the reason journalists are believed. The main reason journalists are believed is because they had access to those broadcast tools. So a radio station, a TV station, a printing press. So what's changed? Well, this guy mainly. This was taken in 1985, about a month before I was born, and it wasn't even until 4 years later that he invented the web. Now, the web has obviously changed the world in a huge number of ways. It's upended all the different kind of technological skills we need. It's changed businesses, and particularly it's changed the power dynamic of our information ecosystem. Anyone can talk to anyone. Anyone can broadcast to anyone at virtually no cost. And when it was being built, there was a huge amount of optimism about what it would do for our democracy. It would enable these conversations which would lead to better information sharing and better decision making. But inevitably, with almost any technological innovation, people have been misusing it. Now, when we talk about fake news now, we often talk about the kind of articles designed to look like legitimate news sources created by Macedonian teenagers to gain ad dollars. But actually, it goes much broader. There's things like this. So this is a Facebook post from a group called Britain First, who have been around for quite a few years and are really good at using social media to spread what is effectively a racist message. This is one trying to get people to share their fears that nativity plays were under threat in UK schools. Nativity plays aren't under threat in UK schools, but it taps into something that makes people want to share it and that promotes a specific agenda, mostly against immigrants and people of other religions. Here's another example from Britain First, because they're particularly good at this. This is one of their leaders, and last year he tweeted a picture of a load of Muslim men celebrating a cricket win in Pakistan. And as you can see, he said it was talking about the Paris terror attacks. But this isn't just the right wing, it's also the left wing. Now, does anyone recognize this? Put your hands up if you maybe have seen it. A few of you. Did any of you share it? No? I did. I'm a journalist. I should know better. I should have checked it. But I shared it because it appealed to the narrative that I had about Donald Trump and Republicans. And the point here is that we're now all operating on a level playing field. All the different sources of information, no matter where they come from, no matter who's producing them, are actually basically competing without any differentiation. And the problem is that a public who has spent years getting used to having trusted sources of information are really ill-equipped to navigate this situation. And even worse, the media are completely unprepared for the competition. Now, as I've said, this isn't actually new. This has been happening for years. You've had Britain First. You've had the web and lots of disinformation on there. But Trump's victory did two main things. First, it actually made the media wake up to this problem and start discussing it. But that led in turn to a realization among those who wanted to misuse the internet that actually they could take advantage of it. And of course, we're going to go back to this guy. The speed with which everyone from the president to internet trolls and everyone in between really underlines this problem. The speed with which they used fake news as a way to discredit people. Now, clearly it's opportunistic, but it gets at that deeper realization that the authority that traditional media sources had doesn't really exist on the internet anymore. So where are we now, about 6 months after Trump's election? Well, I'm going to use this guy. I love a war analogy like pretty much most people in the media. Unfortunately, this guy came up with the best term for this, Infowars. This is Alex Jones. He founded Infowars quite a few years ago. And he's one of many who really grasped this early on, that they're on a level playing field and it's a war. People are using conventional weapons of rigorous reporting and government press releases, but others are using weapons of mass deception, fake news, branding the press the opposition party. And there's no sort of Geneva Convention governing this, stopping people from using the tools and disinformation that really do damage. And because it's taking place in our online spaces, there are no civilians, just people to be enlisted on one side or another. Now, I will say it's not just right-wing guys like Alex Jones doing this, it is the left, but I would argue the right-wing have been quicker to do it and also have done a bit more damage, because there really are casualties like this guy. This is Lenny Posner. His son Noah, who he's here pictured with, was one of the many young children killed in the Sandy Hook massacre in 2012. Now, Posner now gets regular death threats from people who are convinced that the Sandy Hook massacre was a fraud, that it was a hoax. He gets them regularly every week, and he responds to them and tries to tell them that, no, it really happened, he's lost his son. And he's got this visceral experience that he knows it's true. But he's being hounded regularly. And the thing about Lenny is, before he started getting these death threats, before these hoaxers got in touch, he was one of the people who would have believed all the conspiracy theories. He watched Alex Jones. Alex Jones now promotes these conspiracy theories. Now, this may sound like a lament for some golden age, when people who look like this, or people who look like me, got to tell you what the truth was, got to tell you what information to trust. But actually, I will admit, that era was fundamentally undemocratic. And not only was it undemocratic, but journalism in that monopolistic situation started to get lazy and arguably arrogant. And I'm going to give you some examples. When you read an article and someone is quoted anonymously as an anonymous source close to the company or close to the politician, quite often, every now and again, that person will be the PR guy for that person, for that company. Not always, but relatively regularly. But do people know that? Do you know that when you're reading an article? Another example, lobby journalists. They're the journalists who spend almost all their time in Parliament, following MPs, following speeches, following votes. Now, if someone gives a big speech, at the end of it, those journalists will often gather around and have a discussion. What's the best line? What's the most interesting angle? And the result of this is that those journalists, in some instances, will go back to their editors and they'll say, we think this is the best line. And you'll see two newspapers who may be diametrically opposed in terms of politics come up with basically the same story with slight tweaks. And even worse than that kind of arrogance is the fact that we've actually really failed to reflect the diversity of views and experiences that our audience have. That's to a large part because we come from a group of people who, maybe not elite, but we do have shared experiences. The shared experiences in the UK, working in London, of going to the same events. And that is incredibly undemocratic. In contrast, the web is in principle, the most democratic thing that's ever happened to human society. The problem is that you've got bad actors taking advantage of the chaos. Bad actors like him again. I just really love the photo. It's a bit distracting though, so I'm just going to go back to a boring picture of a newsroom. Now, you may realize when I've been talking about this change, I haven't been talking about the technology companies. And in this debate, the technology companies, mainly Facebook and Google, have taken a lot of the blame. And absolutely, they're facilitating, they're accelerating this in many ways. And they have a responsibility to act. But I don't think it's enough to rely upon them to solve this problem. It's bigger than Facebook and Google, and I also don't trust them to actually come up with the appropriate solution. So what can we do? Well, I believe that to actually change the situation and turn the web into a force for good in our information ecosystem, we actually need a new partnership between the media and the audience. Now, I'm going to start with the media because that's where I'm from. And one of the good things about this debate about fake news is that we've actually got to a situation where the people who've been warning about these issues for a while have begun to be listened to. And one of my former colleagues at The Guardian, who is now a professor at Temple University in Philadelphia, a man called Aaron Pilhofer, he came up with this as a question and a lot of practical solutions. And the question was, how do we optimize for trust? And one of the practical solutions he came up with was about advertising, responsible advertising. Now, this is from CNN, but you'll see it on most websites, right at the bottom. And these are a load of sponsored ads that we get paid for. Now, the money we get from these, this funds journalism. But if you look at these, this is not responsible. These are ads that are kind of often designed to look like news stories, or links, for instance, to other publications that you probably wouldn't ever tell your audience to read. But we swallow this because we need the money. Yet we're undermining the fundamental thing we need to build, and that's trust. Another of his suggestions is being much more explicit in explaining how we work. Journalists take for granted what we do a lot, and we kind of expect people to actually understand it without an explanation. So here's an example. This is from The Guardian, where I used to work. And these are two stories. Now, one of these is an opinion story, and one of these is a news story. How do you know? I know because they're different colors, but we sort of expect everyone else to just get that. And this really affected, you can see this in a New York Times article recently, where they hired an opinion writer who wrote that it was kind of okay to be a climate change denier. And there was obviously a lot of blowback. And the response from the MIT was, well, this is an opinion piece. We have to reflect a diverse range of opinions. But the public don't really get that. You're not explicitly explaining that all the time. And so they got lots of people unsubscribing. It really broke that trusted relationship, partly because we weren't expressing ourselves well enough. And then possibly the most important thing, this. We need to talk to our audience and actually get engaged with you. And so these are some examples. So on the top, your left, you have CNN. Very simple project, asking people to send in your reporting, your pictures. This is a way of actually building relationship. Then we have The Guardian at the bottom here, and that is an example of one of the projects The Guardian is doing, where they go out into the community and go and talk to Guardian readers about a specific issue. They ask them what we should be covering, who you should be talking to, and generally try and help them shape our coverage. And then on your right, you have DE Correspondent. These guys are kind of hot stuff at the moment in the media because they've built a membership model for their journalism where their readers pay them, but more importantly, actually contribute to their journalism. They've had some great scoops out of this. And they also have an engaged audience who are always going to come back and keep helping them tweak things so that trust is at the heart of what they do. But as you may have guessed, this is just one side of the equation, and the other bit is you guys. Obviously, we need your help. The first one is really practical. The first suggestion I have is a really practical idea here. Share responsibly. It's pretty simple. If something really appeals to you, it's a great headline, you really want to believe it, check if it's true before you share it. It's not hard. Another one, though, is actually challenge falsehoods you see, be it on social media or in the pub. If someone says or shares something that you know is probably not true, and you can prove it, have that argument. It may not be comfortable, but it's vital. And then again, just like the news organizations are trying to engage the public, you need to engage back. If we go out asking for input and we don't receive anything, we're not going to change what we do. And then one little selfish one, also pay for the news you like, because I need to pay my rent really badly. Now, none of this is going to change the situation we're in and put things back the way they were. It won't make the media the dominant force in information. Nothing that isn't a massive restriction on freedom of expression actually would. And it's not going to make people stop believing falsehoods. Confirmation bias, just natural human instincts makes people want to believe things and believe them. But I do fundamentally believe that a cooperative relationship between the media and the public is the only way of creating a new, strong information ecosystem that can resist the attempts to deceive, misinform, and damage our democracy and our society. Thank you.